I, 54, male, have been a dad to 2 kids, my daughter Eleanor, 24, female, and my stepson Alex, 26, male. Eleanor's mother, my first wife, and I were divorced for several years. We got divorced when Eleanor was 3 years old, but got back together a few months ago. My second wife, Alex's mother, passed away 4 years back. She was an amazing and beautiful woman, but if I'm being honest, she kind of dropped the ball when it came to being a mother. She never disciplined her son, and he sort of grew up to be a disaster. Even while he was in his teens, which is when I met his mother, he was a delinquent. But everyone believed that he'd grow out of that phase. He didn't, and continued to be a bully and got up to all sorts of shenanigans, so much so that we were more than relieved to ship him off to college when the time came. When I say that he was a bully, I don't just mean kids at his school. He was a bully through and through, even while he was at home. He never tried anything funny while his mother and I were actually home, but I would always get reports of him bullying Eleanor and making her cry whenever we'd come back. She said that he was rude to her all the time and would force her to do his share of chores often. Not just that, but he and his friends would bully her at school as well, and I tried to get his mother to discipline him or at least talk to him, but she kept claiming that he was just a kid and would grow out of it eventually. So I had to step up and take charge instead. I told him that he couldn't push people around all the time and try to intimidate them into doing what he wanted, but he fought back and said that he would do whatever he wanted. All my threats were pointless because he truly didn't care. I couldn't kick him out because then my wife would leave with him, and even Eleanor didn't want that. So we just had to make our peace with his behavior. It wasn't the best choice, but it was our only choice, and it was Eleanor herself who told me to give up trying to fix Alex's behavior because he was never going to change. She'd stopped talking to him altogether, and that had improved their relationship significantly, meaning they didn't even have one anymore, which is what they preferred. Eventually, he went away to college, and we finally had some peace and quiet around the house after that. My wife obviously kept in touch with him after he went away and tried to get us to talk to him as well, but neither my daughter nor I wanted that. We kept our interactions limited to when he would come back home for the holidays, and even then, we wouldn't speak to each other more than what was absolutely required. After my wife passed away, we stopped speaking because she was the glue holding us together, but now that she was gone, there was no reason for us to even acknowledge each other's existence. The last time I saw Alex was at my wife's funeral. It's been 4 years since then, and I have moved on somehow. My wife had been battling with cancer for the last 2 years of her life, and in spite of all the chemo, she couldn't make it. I was just content that I got to spend the last few moments of her life with her, and she passed away happy because she'd been with me, Alex, and Eleanor. Family meant the most to her, and passing away in the company of her family was all that she'd wanted, and I was glad that I was able to give that to her. But unfortunately, that was the last time we were all together. Or maybe, fortunately, I don't know. I don't know what Alex had been up to after his mother's death, and in fact, I don't even know what he'd been up to in the years after he graduated. My wife told me that he found a job and was working, but I didn't ask much about it. My wife had left him all her jewelry with the exception of a silver necklace, which I'd gifted her, that she left for Eleanor. He also inherited 75% of the money she had left, and the rest of it was split between me and Charity. He met with her lawyer separately, so we didn't see him at the reading of her will either. My relationship with Alex was strained at best, so I didn't feel too upset when he stopped talking altogether. I did sometimes find myself wondering what had become of him, but I knew that there was no point in thinking about it because he had his own life now, and we weren't a part of it. Besides, the way he'd bullied my daughter almost all her life was something that I'd never really be able to bring myself to forgive. I had very mixed feelings towards Alex, which is what I'm actually trying to convey right now. Around a week ago, Alex called me in the middle of the night, and I was shocked when I realized that it was him. I hadn't heard from him for 4 years, and suddenly, out of the blue, he called me at midnight. Once I got over the initial shock, I asked him why he'd called and tried to keep the surprise out of my voice when I spoke to him. He sounded really anxious, and I could instantly tell that something was very, very wrong. His voice was hoarse and small, and he sounded nothing like the boisterous young man I used to know. He confessed that he was in some trouble, but he didn't specify what sort of trouble he was in exactly, so I knew that things must be really bad. Then he confessed that he'd called me because he needed help since he was in a really tough spot and was going through a lot right now. I didn't know what to say because even though I knew that he was in trouble, I didn't want to get caught up in that. So after contemplating for a few seconds, I told him that I wouldn't be able to help him and then disconnected the call. I felt horrible about it afterwards, but I couldn't do anything else. I'm not trying to get involved in something illegal or shady, and I'm 100% sure that whatever trouble Alex is in will require me to do so. I'm too old and tired for any of that, and I do feel guilty for not helping him out, but I really needed to put myself first this time. I'd always put my family above myself, but that just ended with my daughter getting bullied in her teens and my stepson still never growing out of his bad habits. So now I just wanted to live my own life peacefully without any trouble. Unfortunately, the day that he'd called, my daughter and her fiance happened to be visiting, and she was sitting in the same room, so she'd heard my side of the conversation. Once I hung up, she asked me about it, and I told her the truth. I also mentioned that I decided not to help Alex simply because I wanted to lead a quiet and trouble-free life right now. When I explained that to her, she got up and left to go to sleep abruptly without even wishing me good night, which is something she always does, so I was a little put off by her reaction. I hadn't expected her to care because obviously Alex was her childhood bully, so why would she care about what happened to him, be it good or bad? I thought she'd be all right by the next day because her in-laws were supposed to visit for the first time. They lived in Switzerland and this would be their first trip to the US, so we wanted to make them feel welcome as possible, and Eleanor had been very excited about it as well. Eleanor's mother was also coming over so that we could meet her fiance's parents together. It was supposed to be the first meeting of the families, so it was quite a special day for all of us involved. I didn't think that the phone call with Alex would be such a big deal, but even the next day she refused to speak to me like she used to, and didn't even let me help her with anything before her in-laws arrived, even though it was my own house that we were hosting this meeting at. I was the host, but I felt like a total outsider because Eleanor was getting along with her fiancé and mother just fine, but kept pushing me away. I felt bad, but didn't make a big deal out of it and decided that it must be out of nerves. I knew that it wasn't, but I didn't want to ruin the day for myself by believing that my daughter was actually pushing me away just because I'd refused to help my stepson who'd bullied her entire life. None of it made sense, and I didn't want to think about it at the time, so I just left the situation alone and focused on making our guests feel welcome whenever they'd arrived. I did up the living room and even went out and got a bottle of champagne to take my mind off things, so by the time Eleanor's future in-laws arrived in the evening, I was in a considerably better mood. After the guests arrived and we got to talking, things started going smoothly and it was all going well until we started discussing kids. They started telling us childhood stories of Eleanor's fiancé, and we were all laughing, and so I decided to tell some funny stories of my own from when Eleanor was little. I told them about one time that Eleanor came back home crying just because she'd spilled some ketchup on herself at school, and the other kids had made fun of her the entire day. I'd thought it was a funny story to share, and everyone laughed, even Eleanor. But after that, she said a couple of things that I'm still thinking about even now, even after several days have passed since. She started talking about how back then I'd had multiple chances of being a good father by trying to put an end to all the bullying she faced, but I never seemed to care because my own peace of mind was more important, which is why I never wanted to get caught up in anything that would cause me extra trouble. She'd made her peace with it back then, but even now, I hadn't changed, and when life was giving me yet another chance to be a good dad to someone else, no matter who it was and what they'd done, I was making the same mistakes and choosing my own peace yet again. She said all of this with a straight face and then started laughing and said that she thought what I was doing was a lot funnier than whatever stories I had to tell. Of course, that made everyone very uncomfortable, especially our guests who didn't even know what she was talking about, but knew that whatever she was referring to couldn't be anything good. I'm not kidding when I say that you could cut the tension in the room with a knife. It was that bad. So Eleanor's mother, my ex-wife, quickly switched to talking about other things so that we could diffuse the situation, but the damage had already been done and the rest of the evening just felt forced and awkward. They had dinner and left as soon as possible, and my daughter and her fiancé left with them. My ex-wife was very confused about the comment that Eleanor had made, and so she asked me what was going on. I told her very honestly about Alex, the phone call, and what I'd said. My ex-wife also believes that I should have helped Alex out because the fact that he was asking me for help meant that he looked up to me as a father figure in the first place. And even she thinks that I'd been very selfish back when Eleanor was getting bullied. She said that Eleanor's feelings might be confusing, but they were still valid. But ultimately, it's my choice about what I want to do. Now I'm just really lost. AITA for not wanting to help my stepson after he bullied my daughter for years? Update 1. Hey, I wanted to explain my family dynamics in more detail so that it's clear for everyone who's still confused. Alex's father had passed away when he was 2 years old, and I hadn't even met his mother until he was 10 years old. He didn't resent me in particular. He was just a bitter kid in general, and we were never able to figure out why. As for my ex-wife and I, we didn't separate because we hated each other, but we'd been bickering a lot since we just weren't compatible at the time, so we decided to separate. We continued to be good friends and co-parent Eleanor. We reconnected a few months back and have been seeing each other since then. She didn't get married after we separated, but she did date a few men. None of her relationships worked out, and eventually we found our way back to each other. This doesn't mean that whatever I had with my second wife wasn't real, or I was still hung up on my first wife when I was with her, just to be clear. As for Eleanor, she never had any issues with the co-parenting arrangement and didn't hold that against me at all. She also loves Alex's mother, perhaps not as much as her own, but she is still close to her. I don't know why she's acting so strange now, but honestly, she never expressed any issues with whatever arrangement we had while she was growing up. I don't know where all of this is coming from all of a sudden and why she believes that I didn't try my best to be there for her and prevent Alex from bullying her back when she was younger. I really did try as hard as I could. And I think I was able to reduce the bullying at the very least. I just feel like crap because of what she said to me, and it's like they can't even see that I tried my very best to balance all the relationships I've had to manage. All of this just sucks. Update 2. So I decided to speak to Eleanor about what she said, like a lot of you suggested I do. I couldn't live with this eating away at me and then pretending that it was all fine just because her in-laws were visiting. I invited her home this evening and told her to elaborate on what she meant to say when she said whatever she said the other day. And we had a heart-to-heart for the first time in ages, which was much needed. I realize that now. She told me that her feelings about her childhood were all really messed up, and even she herself couldn't figure out where this bitterness and resentment was actually stemming from. She confessed that back when she was in high school and Alex would bully her all the time, be it in school or at home, she began to hate him and always believed that she wasn't doing enough. She loved Alex's mother. That was true, but she hated Alex just as much as she loved his mother, and back then, even though she never verbalized it, she'd actually wanted me to kick Alex out to teach him a lesson. no matter what the consequences of that would be. But then she didn't want my wife to leave, so that led to a lot of internal strife, which she never told me about because it was all just so confusing. As for what happened recently, when she realized that now I was refusing to help Alex out, she felt awful because she felt like I was choosing not to help someone who considered me a father figure yet again. In spite of her past feelings towards Alex, she's softened up considerably over the years because now that he's an orphan and literally has nobody else to look out for him, she thinks that I could help him out. She feels like she resonates with him in a very messed up way, since even her childhood was weird and abnormal, to say the least. The bottom line is, now, as an adult, she believes that I should do the right thing and help Alex out. Like Eleanor's mother also said, she thinks that if Alex looks up to me as a father figure, then this is the least I can do for the poor guy, since he literally doesn't have anyone else. I think it's really mature on her part, even though she hasn't yet forgiven him. Neither have I forgiven him fully, but I do think I'd like to help him out. Besides, I don't think I'd ever be able to forgive myself if anything really bad were to happen to him. The fact that he'd reached out to me and I turned him away would eat away at me for the rest of my life if something unfortunate was to happen. He hasn't reached out to me again, but I'll call him back tonight itself. Update 3. I called Alex back a few days back, and thank God that I did, because he was in serious trouble. He'd sold off all his mother's jewelry to support his drug addiction and pay off gambling debts, and was absolutely broke after everything he'd been through. He'd been living on the streets for the past few weeks because his landlord had evicted him after he couldn't pay rent and was scavenging for food to eat like an animal. He told me where he was, and I drove there immediately to pick him up. He'd been living in an abandoned building with a bunch of other junkies and was so filthy that I could hardly even recognize him when I saw him. He was also running a high fever and looked like he would collapse if he had to even lift a finger. I rushed him to the hospital without wasting any time, and luckily they were able to bring him back to full health in just a couple of days. We had the option of sending him to rehab, but I decided to take care of him myself because I couldn't imagine leaving him by himself again. He'd been a mean little bully back when he was younger, but now I just couldn't seem to reconcile that teenager with the emaciated man I saw in front of me. It was horrible to see him like that. But I was glad that I got to him before things got even worse than they already were. I hate to sound negative, but I really don't think he would have survived if I hadn't called him back when I did. I really am grateful to my ex-wife and Eleanor for telling me to help him out, because I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if something happened to Alex. No matter what our relationship in the past had been, and he's changed considerably, which is no big surprise. Grief does that to people. He'd been really grateful to me and says thank you to me after everything that I do, even if it's something very basic. He'd been really quiet when I brought him back home and barely said anything apart from his thank yous and good mornings and good nights. That's all. But recently he's been opening up to me a little, and we did have a real conversation about what really happened to him after his mother's passing. In fact, we went back even further and discussed his behavioral issues when he was in high school and why exactly he was so resentful and bitter about everything. It was a difficult conversation, especially because he still seemed so out of it. But he wanted to talk about it and get it out of his system, so we did talk about it. He told me that he'd always felt like he was missing an integral piece of the family he wanted to have ever since he was a kid, because he didn't have a dad. So when his mother introduced him to me, he finally felt like that void would be complete, but then he got to know that I already had a daughter and realized that come what may, I'd always put her first. That's where the resentment started, so he pushed me away, even though he did look at me as a father figure, and hated Eleanor because she felt as if she was taking away his only chance at having a perfect family. And things only got worse with time, so he continued to isolate himself and push us away. After his mother passed away, he realized that he had absolutely nobody to call his own anymore, and that sent him into a depression that he couldn't deal with. So he got into drugs, gambling, drinking, until he couldn't walk straight almost every day. He had a few friends to support these habits and also all the money and jewelry that his mother had left him. But recently he ran out of money, and even his so-called friends left his side, which is why he turned to me, because he knew he couldn't count on anyone else. It was a desperate last-ditch attempt at saving and redeeming himself as a human being, and I am truly grateful that I answered his call for help. I'm ready to start afresh with him and make sure that he gets all the help he needs, because while I may not be an expert on family and how to deal with such complicated relations, I do know basic human compassion and empathy, and I'm sure that his mother would want me to do this for him. Update 4. Hey guys, it's been 5 months since the last update, and truth be told, I sort of forgot about it. But now that I'm here, I'd like to give you guys a quick update on what happened after the last update. So as you all know, Alex was having a hard time in the aftermath of his addiction, and try as I might, I'm not a qualified professional, so we eventually did have to send him to rehab so he could heal properly. It broke my heart to send him away, but both of us knew that this was for the best. At least we did spend those few weeks before rehab together, so we were grateful for that. While he was in rehab, both my daughter and I would visit him regularly, and occasionally even my ex-wife. Or I guess I should call her my girlfriend right now, since we've been going strong for close to a year. It feels weird to call her that, but for the sake of this post, I'll stick to it. He continued to improve with time and was released yesterday, which is lucky because he's out just in time to attend Eleanor's wedding in 3 weeks. They're not the best of friends yet, and I don't think they'll ever be, but they're okay with each other now, so that's a start. And Eleanor really does want us all, including Alex, at her wedding. He's going to start looking for a job soon as well, and until then, he's going to be living with me. He's in much better shape now, and I'm very grateful for it. Families are complicated, but I think with love, we can get through whatever life throws at us. This sounds really preachy, but at least that's the real lesson that I'm taking away from all of this. Thank you for all the love. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.